Verlecken! And hello, it's Vale, and welcome to Magic Mondays. Last time we looked at our monocolored green deck, Solar Green, and this week we're going to look at mixing two colours together to make a dual colour deck. We're going with black and white, and then we're going to make this a tribal deck. Tribal decks are decks that use creatures of all the same type, and they have spells and effects which benefit from having that one type of creature. So our creature type today is going to be zombies, so we're going to make a black and white zombie tribal deck. I've already got the deck here. I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to show you each of the cards in it before we go and play some games with it. We're going to look at it the same way the computer lays it out, in converted mana cost order. So in our 1-drop slot, to start off we've got 2 copies of the Quickbreaker. It's a 1/1 zombie for 1, and we can use its ability to discard a card and create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So much like Mrs. Pashiri, it can gain us creature advantage. Also, if we tap 3 zombies we control at any time, we can draw a card at the cost of 1 life, which again is a common theme in black. Also in our 1-drop slot, we've got 2 copies of Dread Wanderer. It comes into play tapped, but it's a 2/1 for 1, and we can always recur it back from our graveyard if we have 1 or less cards in our hand at the cost of 3. So he's good to block with and let die, and then we can bring him back over and over again essentially. Grave recursion is a great theme in zombies, and we'll see more of that as we go through the deck. Just a one-off copy of this enchantment, Graph Harvest, means all our creatures get menace. A creature with menace can only be blocked with 2 creatures, or more. If our opponent has only 1 defender and we attack with a creature that has menace, it can't be blocked. We can also use the second ability on Graph Harvest to exile a card from our graveyard, a creature card, and get a free 2/2 black zombie as a replacement onto the battlefield. Next up we have 2 copies of Dark Salvation. Dark Salvation is essentially a kill spell, but it lets us generate more zombies. If we had, say, 3 zombies on the field, and only 1 black mana to spend, and our opponent has a 3/3 creature, we could still use this at the cost of only 1 black mana to give our opponent's creature -3/-3 because we already control 3 zombies. In the later game it's great. If we have plenty of mana, we can create plenty more zombie tokens, and we can kill something that's even bigger. If a creature gets -X/-X, even if it's indestructible, it'll still die if its toughness goes below 0 or hits 0. Next up we have 2-drop Binding Mummy. It's our first white creature. Whenever we have Binding Mummy already on the field, and then we cast a subsequent zombie, or a zombie token comes into play on our side, we get to tap one of our opponent's creatures. That way we can potentially tap their biggest defender and swing in for an attack. Just a one-off, we've got Rancid Rats. They're good because they have Death Touch. A creature with Death Touch can kill any creature it comes into contact with. So if our opponent swings in with a big 10/10, we can still block it and kill it with our 1/1. So it does have Skulk, so we can get through, we can attack, and it can't be blocked by a creature that has 2 power or more. But most of the time we're going to leave this back on defense, just to scare off our opponent from attacking us. Next up is Wayward Servant. He's the reason that we're playing the zombie tribal deck. He's the reason that we're playing black and white, so we can play this creature. Whenever a zombie comes into play, when the Wayward Servant is already on the battlefield under our control, then our opponents lose 1 life and we gain 1 life. And you can imagine if every creature is a zombie, everyone that we get out, we're going to end up over the course of a game getting lots of lives back and draining our opponent of all of their lives. So this is the primary idea of the deck. This is what we want to see in our opening hands. And this is how we win the game. Next up, we've got Declaration in Stone. This is the best white removal in Duels, I would say. We can exile a target creature our opponent controls, and all the other creatures that have the same name as it. our opponent gets compensated with clue tokens for each non-token creature that gets destroyed this way, or exiled this way I should say. But it works best if our opponent is playing lots of tokens. So if our opponent is playing a similar deck to us and plays all zombie tokens, a bunch of 2/2 tokens that are all the same, we could exile them all, get rid of them all out of the way, and our opponent doesn't get any clues in compensation. Next up, we have the diagraph Colossus. He again is a major feature of this deck. If we've got him out, and we have no creatures in our graveyard, no zombies, he's just a 2/2 for 3. But every zombie that we lay after that, it generates us an extra zombie token. Comes into play tapped, but it's still gaining us creature advantage. If we see him later in the game, and we've already got a lot of zombies in our graveyard, then he comes into play with +1/+1 counters on him for each zombie in our graveyard. So he can come in as a 5/5, a 6/6 sometimes, if it's the middle of the game, and if it's the early game, then we can use him to generate lots of tokens. Plague Belcher is 5/4 menace for 3. The downside for getting a 5/4 for 3 is that when he comes into play, you have to put 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature you control. So if you had only the Plague Belcher, you'd have to put the -2/-2 on him, making him a 3/2 menace. But ideally, we want to put it onto one of our tokens, because whenever a zombie we control dies, our opponent loses 1 life when we have the Plague Belcher in play. So we're generating lots and lots of tokens. Whenever they come into play, we're gaining a life, our opponent's losing a life. Then if they die off, our opponent loses another life. And in the late game, when our opponent's down to only a few life, they're not going to want to block our creatures and kill them. They're going to have to make bad blocks so that their creatures die and our ones don't. Otherwise, they're going to lose the last few points of their life. Next up, we have the flashback Marauder. He's a 3/1 for 3, but we're not really concerned about him as an attacker or a blocker. When he comes into play, each player has to sacrifice a creature, meaning yourself and the opponent. So if our opponent has only 1 creature, and we lay down the flashback Marauder, our opponent's going to have to sacrifice it. We're most likely going to sacrifice the Marauder himself, but if we have a worse creature, if we have a creature we can get back from the graveyard, then we can sacrifice that other creature and then bring it back later on and keep our flashback Marauder on the field. Most of the time, we're going to want to sacrifice the flashback Marauder, and then we're going to get the flashback Marauder back out the graveyard to use it again, and keep making our opponents sacrifice their creatures. Even if their creature is hexproof or indestructible, all of these things that we can't kill it directly with spells, we can use the flashback Marauder and he'll make our opponent sacrifice the creature. Next up, we've got Lord of the Accursed. Lords in tribal decks often give the creatures +1/+1. So this Lord gives all zombies +1/+1. We've got 3 copies in the deck, so it should be able to, if we get 2 copies out, obviously all our zombies get +2/+2. And this is going to help our army become massive and overrun our opponent. We can also use a second ability to give all our creatures menace if we don't have Graph Harvest out. So a couple options there that we can give our creatures menace and swing through for a big attack. Again, you see here, creatures with menace can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Oath Liliana is an enchantment, legendary. We've only got 1 copy of it in our deck, and that's fine. If we had 2 copies and we cast the second copy with the first copy on the battlefield, we'd have to get rid of it. Basically, it's for our Liliana planeswalkers. Whenever it comes into play, it has the same effect as a flashback Marauder. Our opponent has to sacrifice a creature. And then, if we have this on the battlefield, and then we get one of our Liliana planeswalkers onto the battlefield, then it'll generate us an extra 2/2 zombie token. So it works well in the deck, has the 2 effects that we like, making our opponents get rid of their creatures and making zombies. Collective Effort is a spell that gives us a choice on what we want to happen. We can either destroy a creature with power 4 or more, we could destroy target enchantment, or we could put a +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures. It has Escalate as well. So if we have creatures that are untapped, we could tap those creatures at the same time as we play the spell, so we can use 2 modes. If we've got 2 available creatures we can tap, we could use all 3 modes if the circumstances fit. So we could destroy one of our opponent's creatures that's 4 or more, destroy one of their enchantments, and put a +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures, but we have to tap 2 creatures and pay the spell's cost, 1 and 2 white. Some situations we'll be able to do all 3. Some situations you might not have any creatures, but you still need the effects, one of these effects in your game. So it's a very versatile card, and it's easy to put into a deck that can play it. Usually white decks have plenty of creatures they can tap. Liliana the Last Hope. It's a planeswalker. Liliana triggers our Oath of Liliana. We can either +1 to give a creature -2/-1 until end of turn, until our next turn. If the creature only has 1 toughness, that's going to kill it off. And if the creature is bigger than that, at least we can reduce the damage it's going to do, or the potential damage it's going to do. That can help protect Liliana from dying. We can also use her negative ability to flip over the top 2 cards for our library into our graveyard, and then get back a creature to our hand from the graveyard. So even if we had nothing in there, we had nothing in our graveyard yet, we can flip 2 cards over, and if we find a creature in there, we can get it back to our hand, and then we can cast it. Her ultimate ability, for -7, if we can use the plus ability a few times, then we get an emblem that generates us 2+X zombies every turn, where X is the number of zombies we already have. So even if we had no creatures, it would generate us 2 zombies, then 4, then 6, but at that point, you know, it grows exponentially, and when you're swinging in with that many zombies, there's just no way your opponent can stop them all. So that's an ideal end game strategy. If we've already got lots of zombies on the field, it generates, you know, loads of zombies on the first turn that we have the emblem. So that's Liliana. We do have a second Liliana in the deck, a more expensive one. We'll get to that one. That's our first Liliana. Next we've got Gravedigger. Gravedigger is a good utility zombie that gets another creature back out of our graveyard to our hand. More graveyard recursion. It's fairly simple, it's fairly straightforward. Next we have the enchantment, Anointed Procession, for 3 and a white. Whenever we make a token, we make twice as many tokens. Simple as that. So whenever we've got Anointed Procession on the field, under our control, if we use Dark Salvation and make, say, 4 tokens, it's going to produce 8 tokens instead on our side. Same with Liliana's ultimate ability. When we're putting 2 plus the number of zombies we've already got onto the field, we're going to put 4 at least onto the field instead. So this doubles up on all our tokens, lets us go super wide, get a huge amount of creatures for the ultimate ending swing. Another enchantment we've got, Liliana's Mastery, up into the 5-drop slot. Again, we've got the Lord effect, that all zombies we control get +1/+1. And, when it comes into play, it gives us 2 free zombie tokens. If we've got Anointed Procession out, it's obviously going to give us 4. And even if we've got nothing else, and we've just laid out Liliana's Mastery, it generates 2 2/2s, which instantly become 3 3s, because of the effect of the enchantment. If we have the 3 Lords out, and we have the Mastery out, then all of our 2/2 tokens are going to be 6 6s. From under the floorboards, also in our 5-drop slot, gets us 3 zombie tokens into the battlefield. They come in tapped, but we do gain 3 life. It also has a madness cost, so if we're forced to discard a card, and we discard from under the floorboards, and we have the mana to pay for it, we can pay the madness cost, and that'll get us X zombie tokens into the battlefield, and we'll gain X life. Our 1-drop Quickbreaker can let us discard this card to the Quickbreaker's ability, so we don't have to wait for our opponent to play a discard spell on us in order to use the madness cost. Liliana Death's Majesty is our other Liliana Planeswalker. It's more expensive at 3 and 2 black, but it comes into play with 5 loyalty counters already on it. We can go up by 1, to make a zombie token, and that's usually what we're going to want to do. We also put the top 2 cards of our library into our graveyard if we use this ability. Might not seem good, but again, if we have plenty of zombies in the graveyard, our diagraph Colossus comes in bigger. And also we can get any creatures that we really want back out of the graveyard. We can use Liliana's negative ability to do this. So if we go up a couple of times, make a few zombies, and we've put a few cards into the graveyard, we can then get one back straight onto the battlefield. So it doesn't go back to our hand that we have to cast it again, it just appears on the battlefield. So if we use that ability on a flashback Marauder, it can be a quick way to get our opponent to sacrifice a creature and hopefully save our Liliana. This is the Liliana we want to protect more than the other one, because the ultimate ability is destroy all non-zombie creatures. So we can wipe away our opponent's entire army if they are not zombies. And that's a great ultimate ability and can really end most games. That late in the game, with all the blockers gone, you should be able to swing in once and end it. Our last card at the end of the deck is Never. It doesn't cost more than Liliana, it's at the end of the deck because it's a flip card, it's just the way they're presented. Never is a great removal spell, probably the best destroy spell in Duels. We can destroy target creature or planeswalker, and being able to just destroy a planeswalker with a spell is very powerful, rather than having to have the right circumstances to be able to swing in and deal it enough damage to take it away from the battlefield. Our flip side is an aftermath flip side. Basically, once we've played Never and it's gone into our graveyard, we can then play the other side of the card. We can play Return. And Return exiles a card out of our opponent's graveyard and gives us a zombie. So if we destroy, say, a planeswalker or a really important creature with Never, then the next turn, or the same turn if we've got a lot of mana, then we can play Return, and that way it gets exiled out of the graveyard and our opponent has no way of recurring it back on the battlefield or back to their hand. So that's all the cards in our deck. Next we're just going to look at the mana base, the lands that we're going to need to play. We've got plains, we've got swamps, fairly simple. We've got 2 Shambling Vents. Shambling Vent is a dual land. It can give us white or black. It comes into play tapped, so we can't use it the turn we put it onto the battlefield. But the upside is, we can turn it into a creature by paying 1 black and 1 white, and it becomes a 2/3 lifelink creature until the end of turn. So we can surprise our opponents by turning it into a creature on the block and destroy one of our opponent's attacking creatures, or we can use it in certain situations where we need to attack, where our opponent has no defending creatures perhaps and we have nothing better to spend our mana on. We can turn it into a creature, then we can attack our opponent with that creature. It has lifelink, so it's one of the few ways that we gain life back, along with from under the floorboards. So there are ways for us to get out of a bad situation, and this is one of them. West Vale Abbey is another way to get out of a bad situation. It's a land, non-basic. We can tap to add 1 colourless to our mana pool. So it doesn't give us black or white, but it has great advantages, you'll see. We can pay 5 colourless mana and tap it to get a 1/1 creature token. It's not a zombie, so it doesn't fit in with the rest of our tokens, but the alternative ability, we can pay 5 and sacrifice 5 creatures, and we can flip the land, and then we can see what's on the reverse. So in plenty of situations we'll have 5 zombie tokens, we'll have loads of zombie tokens, so it should be simple enough for us to flip this card. If we sacrifice 5 zombie tokens and we have the Plague Belcher out, our opponent loses 5 life at the same time. And when we flip over the land, on the back, it suddenly turns into a massive scary demon creature. It's got flying, and lifelink, and indestructible, and haste, so it can attack straight away. 9/7, and if we leave it to block with, our opponent's not really going to get past the 9/7. Their creatures, their attacking creature is going to die unless it has indestructible. But even if they do attack with a larger creature than 9/7, this creature is indestructible, so it can't be destroyed that way. It has to be exiled really, and that's the only thing you can do against it. The creatures that you sacrifice, it doesn't matter if they're tapped or untapped. So you could attack in with a whole bunch of zombie tokens, let them do the job in their combat, and then sacrifice them to get this as a blocker. Or if you do it before combat, just immediately swinging in with the 9/7 flying lifelink is enough to take usually 9 life from them if they don't have a flyer blocker, obviously, and you gain 9 life back. So it's enough to completely swing a game in your favour. Isolated Chapel is a simpler dual land. Much like the Shambling Vent, it gives us white or black, but it can come into play untapped if we already have a swamp or a plains on the battlefield. So if in the first turn we lay out a swamp or a plains, then the second turn we lay the Isolated Chapel, then we could tap it on the second turn to get either or. Next up, Sandstone Bridge. Can only tap for white, and it always comes in tapped, but when it does, target creature on our side gets +1/+1 and vigilance until end of turn. And as we remember from before, vigilance means that when our creature attacks, it doesn't tap. So then we can save it back to block with as well. Mortuary Meyer is similar in that it always comes into play tapped, and it can only tap to give us black. But when it comes into play, we get to choose a creature that's in our graveyard and put it back on top of our library, so at the start of our next turn, we get to draw that creature. And a lot of the time, we'll be casting the flashback Marauder, making our opponent sacrifice a creature, then laying Mortuary Meyer, putting the flashback Marauder back on top of our library, so we can play him again the next turn and do the same thing. Evolving Wilds is going to be essential for multicolored decks. If your opening hand has a mixture of black and white cards, but you only have either all swamps or all plains in your opening hand, you're going to be worried that you're not going to be able to play those other spells of the other colour. If you have Evolving Wilds, you can play it, then sacrifice it to go looking through your entire deck and find that other basic land that you're going to need to play those other spells. And that's our black and white zombie tribal deck. As before, we can go down to the settings, we can have a look at the mana curve. We can see the colour distribution of the spells in our deck. And from here, edit the sleeves and the persona and the name of the deck. So like last week, I'll put up a few videos during the week of the deck in action, and we'll see how it fares. Instead of playing the predictable AI opponents, we'll go on and play a real world opponent as we get more interesting games out of that. So until then, take it easy, and I'll see you soon.